Recently, I had a very kind viewer, Kendra, suggest that I consider doing a video on the Oregon Trail. I've always found it very interesting anyway, so I was definitely on board with the idea. Here you have a historic route that was used to travel from the eastern United States to the western territories. The journey tested human endurance and perseverance. But as I hit 500 subscribers, I decided that I wanted to do something fun with this as a bit of a celebration. Thinking back to my childhood, like many kids, the Oregon Trail video game that I got to play was one of my earliest exposures to actual history of the Old West. But how accurate was the game really? To understand this, I went ahead and recently played 3 rounds of the game and spent some time researching the actual history to determine the accuracy of the game. But I got much more than that. I got an admiration for the actual people who undertook these grueling journeys for the chance at a better life, and also putting that into perspective from modern eyes. But also, ultimately, I just had some fun because, let's face it, the game is fun. I put a link to the website where you can play it yourself. No download is required. You can play directly on the website in your browser. You'll enjoy the nostalgia. So I'm going to sort of dig right into this, and we're going to start in Independence, Missouri. So what happens in Independence, Missouri is a really big variable as to how the game will be either won or lost, and more on that in a moment. But I'll take a second to talk about Independence, Missouri and what it meant to the trail. Independence was known as the Queen City for the trails because it was the starting point whether you were going to Oregon, California, or New Mexico territories. This was the farthest point west that a steamboat could go on the Missouri River, which made it perfect as a starting point for any overland journey west. Independence, Missouri was a boom town, and it was very prosperous for the big business of outfitting travelers that were trying to head west. So this would be a good time to get our settlers going. We have to decide first what our fearless leader's occupation is. This will determine money, skills, and essentially how the journey will go. You can be a banker from Boston, you can be a carpenter from Ohio, or a farmer from Illinois. The banker from Boston gets the most money. In fact, it's $1,600 versus much more paltry amounts that the others get. So that's what I decided that I was going to pick. It's worth mentioning that there are points in the game that you get if you pick the other occupations, since they're a lot more challenging. But in this case, we're really just trying to get through the game and talk about the real history. We're really not under the purpose of trying to earn points or impress our gamer friends. So we're going to just go on with the more money option. It starts us out with a nice amount of food and oxen, and we actually have about $550 to spare in addition to that. And you're going to see we're going to actually need that later. So you'll see that also I started in May. This is hopefully going to keep us out of some bad weather, though chances are I might end up in the middle of winter when we get to the end, but I still like my chances. So now that we've bought our oxen, that brings up an important point on historical accuracy here, and it's our first point that I want to make. So you're going to see that the game makes the point essentially that it's a given that you're going to use oxen on your journey. But one historian, Tim McNeice, had indicated that while oxen were certainly the best choice to travel because they were very durable and cheaper to purchase than using a horse or a mule, they would actually also eat pretty much anything, and they were also rarely ever stolen. So while they were the best choice, many still would use horses and mules. There was even one group of pioneers called the Mormon handcart pioneers that traveled in the 1850s that did not have money for wagon trains, so they pulled handcarts. Unfortunately, many of these handcart pioneers died. It was actually a very sad chapter in the history of Mormonism. So now let's get our pioneers going. So I've gone ahead and named them, and you'll see, first off, you have Lars, who's the leader, and he's our banker from Boston. You also have, we would just assume would be the wife, Bonita, and then the eldest daughter, whose name is Dora. She's the most flighty of our pioneers. Some may actually call her an explorer. Next we have Sally, and then bringing up the caboose is the young lad Sydney. So let's get them going so we can see the trail and learn some history. So my first run of this game did not go too well. I went with a steady pace in the first game, and by trial and error I learned that I need to go with a more strenuous pace. I've seen the grueling pace before, and while it can get you through the game a lot quicker, you're likely to lose some family members quickly. So instead I'm going with strenuous, and whenever conditions of the family drop down from good to fair, I'll let them rest some. So they're off, and you'll see immediately that they find an abandoned wagon. These are extra supplies that can be used or traded later, which is a nice bonus to have right out of the gate. So now we get to the Kansas River crossing, and you got this nice little graphic representation of it, which of course 8-year-old me was totally impressed with these graphics at the time. So it's kind of funny in retrospect now when you see the types of graphics and you get in video games. So let's see what the actual river crossing looked like. So here's you a picture. So you don't actually see it in this game, but the real river crossing you could actually purchase supplies at. So this is actually located in Shawnee County, Kansas, near modern day Topeka. So here we are on May the 5th, 1848, and everyone seems to be in good health right now. So let's go ahead and cross the river. So the river is 626 feet across and 4.5 feet deep in the middle. I do know, due to my earlier attempts at this game, that you do not want to go through anything that's over 3 feet of water. So our options are really to ford the river, which we know is out. We can caulk the wagon and float it across, or we can take a ferry across. We could also wait to see if conditions improve. But of course, since I've selected the banker, and we know he's good for it essentially, let's pay for it rather than taking the more risky options or the more time-consuming options. So here's what they say. We have to wait 4 days, and they charge $5. I say that $5 is well worth it. But how is this decision typically made in the real Oregon Trail? So on the real Oregon Trail, the decision would not have been necessarily made by Lars in this case. Lars and his family would be part of a larger wagon train. Fording, caulking, or ferrying would actually be decided by more than one person. In this game, it almost seems like a guess at times. But that wasn't really reality, and I'm going to let historian Tim McNeese explain how it really was. So McNeese explains it was usually a group decision. There's someone who's leading the wagon train who knows the lay of the land. They know where they are going to cross, and it's rarely a situation where complete neophytes are saying, when do we cross and where? But we've already pretty much made the decision for Lars and his family. So they do attempt to cross the river, and they do so safely using the ferry option. So our next stretch that we're going to take is going to be to the Big Blue River crossing, and we're able to actually get there without any trouble. And here's you a nice picture of someone actually crossing it using a ferry. But as for our pioneers, fortunately, the river depth is going to be less than 3 feet. So we're going to attempt to ford it. So for the most part, fording this river was a success, except the supplies did get wet and we ended up losing a day. So our next stop is going to be Fort Kearny, which is going to be Nebraska territory. Fort Kearny was built for the sole purpose of being a trading post and also a way stop for pioneers. So rather than a walled fortification like you might expect, Fort Kearny was made mostly of sod. It was said that the construction of it was so crude that snakes often slithered through the walls and into the soldiers' beds, which doesn't really seem to be how it's portrayed in the game here. But our pioneers overall right now seem to be in pretty good health. So we're going to just kind of move on to the next stop, which is going to be Chimney Rock. So we go ahead and arrive at Chimney Rock in fair health on May the 27th, 1848. Chimney Rock, which is located in the Badlands of western Nebraska, is a towering geologic formation with a chimney-shaped hill. Over 500,000 travelers pass the rock, and Chimney Rock is such a popular place that it made it actually onto the Nebraska Quarter, which is pretty cool. So we're going to move on then and head towards Fort Laramie. We still have ample food and good health, but on the following day, our little Dora, who is no doubt exploring something that she probably shouldn't have, ended up with a broken leg. I don't know if Swiper stole her footing out from under her or what happened exactly. That's a dad joke, and you can tell that I've had young kids at one time. And those of you that have also will totally get that. So we also encounter a thunderstorm, but in spite of that, we arrive at Fort Laramie on June 1st. So at this point, we're 1 month into the journey. Fort Laramie was located in eastern Wyoming, and it was an important fur trade post. And if you watched my video on the Lakota, you may remember its importance of being a place of treaties between the U.S. and the Sioux, which of course led to many misunderstandings and also an eventual decline of U.S. and Sioux relations. Our pioneers at this point are in very fair health, so we'll rest before we hit the trail again towards Independence Rock. On June 11th, Sally breaks her arm, but in spite of that, our pioneers arrive at Independence Rock on June 19th, 1848. Independence Rock was important for being a place where many pioneers carved their names. Our pioneers don't seem to be in very good shape, so we'll rest again before we hit the trail again on June the 25th, 1848. But little Sydney gets exhaustion, so we'll rest a few days more, and by July 7th, they'll hit the trail again and arrive at South Pass on July 13th. I want it to be a good time to resupply food, and we're going to do that. So a bit about South Pass. It's essentially a gap that is through the Continental Divide. It was important because it was very easy for wagons to negotiate rather than going through the Rockies. But then the road is going to take a fork, and we have options to either head to the Green River crossing or head for Fort Bridger. My understanding is that you actually have to cross the Green River even if you go to Fort Bridger first. This is apparently a trick of the game. If you go to Fort Bridger first, it slows you down. So I'll just mention something briefly about Fort Bridger. It served as a fur trading post during this time and later served as a Pony Express station and also a station for telegraph. So now we get to the Green River crossing, and we're going to get there on July the 23rd, and the river is 21 feet deep. No thank you. We're going to pick the ferry option, and apart from getting some wet supplies, we are good actually, and we arrive at Soda Springs on August the 6th, 1848. So our pioneers are going to rest until August the 12th and then head to our next stop, which is Fort Hall. Fort Hall is located on the Snake River, which is now actually part of southeast Idaho. It was built in 1834. Both British and American fur traders operated there. So we buy some food here, and then we hit the trail. We have a broken wagon wheel, and of course our banker can't fix that, but he does have a replacement. One of the oxen ends up getting injured, and then we get to the Snake River on August the 29th. So we have to cross here, and we get this interesting scenario where we're told to trade 3 sets of clothing with a Shoshone guide who would agree to take our pioneers across the river. So I need to now address an inaccuracy here. The reality is that natives were not interested in clothes. They wanted ammunition and guns primarily. For the most part, in particular in 1848, when this supposedly is taking place, these trades went smoothly, and natives were happy to help the settlers since they knew that they were passing through and not staying. But later, as the interior of the U.S. became more settled after 1860, much of these relations became much worse. So the Shoshone guide gets them across. The next stop is going to be at Fort Boise, and we're going to be leaving on September 11th, 1848, and then arrive a week later. So our pioneers are going to rest some at Fort Boise before we hit the trail again. So a little bit about Fort Boise. The Fort Boise is located 40 miles from present-day Boise, Idaho. It was a fur trade post for the Hudson Bay Company, which was a British trade company. It was a supply line in the fur trading industry. By 1854, it ended up getting abandoned. And it would actually get rebuilt in what is now Boise, Idaho. So they're going to rest a few more days before hitting the trail. And now that seems like that we're getting a lot closer because there's the Blue Mountains. Our pioneers are in fair shape, so we'll rest some before we make the final push. So on October 11th, we have a choice to make. We can go to either Fort Walla Walla or the Dalles. Let's see Fort Walla Walla. It could be that this is a trick again, and we may have to go to the Dalles anyway. But we want to see the fort. So we're going to arrive at Fort Walla Walla on October 14th, and then we'll resupply here and get some food. And guess what? We have to go back to the Dalles anyway. But I do want to address what is an historical inaccuracy in this game about Fort Walla Walla. So Fort Walla Walla was actually established in 1856, which was 8 years after our pioneers that were making this journey in this game was actually stopping at Fort Walla Walla. So there you go. Guess we should have gone to the Dalles anyway. We didn't really help ourselves to go see Fort Walla Walla because the reality of it is our pioneers would not see Fort at that place. So we get to the Dalles on October 21st, 1848. Our food is down to 10 pounds. So we buy some more food, and then let's rest our travelers before we have to make the final push. We'll go ahead and do 6 days, and then we'll hit the trail again. So now we have a choice between floating down the Columbia River or using the Barlow Toll Road. To me, the $14 is well worth it, and our banker is still good for it. So we hit the trail again, and we get an impassable trail. It's apparently November 3rd, so the weather is cold, and now our pioneers are in poor health. So we'll rest a little bit. And unfortunately, their condition is still poor after the rest. But they're going to go ahead and try to push on. And as you can see, we start having some issues. First, Sydney gets some kind of exhaustion, and then Bonita gets the measles the next day. This would be a good time for us to talk about disease and death on the trail and how accurate that part of the game was. So according to the Bureau of Land Management, 20,000 to 30,000 people died on the trail. Death was very common. So this part of the game is actually very accurate. And we'll see here that Bonita dies as well. And then we'll see that Sally ends up getting typhoid due to very little water. And then Sally goes ahead and dies as well. So let me address something that is very common in these games, and that's dysentery. And you'll see it's so common and it happens so much in the game that even a funny meme regarding the game ended up on a t-shirt. And so I want to flash up a quote here regarding dysentery. In speaking of dysentery, Laura Woolworth-Ney says, dysentery covers a wide range of health issues that resulted from poor sanitation. There's a misconception that these people are by themselves, but at the height of the trail, these campsites are very crowded. There are a lot of well-water places to camp. The places that do have water become congested with people, and they were spreading these diseases through the water. And while we're on the subject, let's address another thing related to death, and that's the headstones. Traditional gravestones were almost non-existent. If a person died of a disease that's communicable, you want to bury them as soon as possible and keep the train moving. You covered over the grave site with rocks so wolves wouldn't dig up your mother and chew her to pieces. So in spite of our missteps, and I'll have to say going to Fort Walla Walla was probably what ended up killing both Bonita and Sally. We also lost some very key time there. But in spite of all that, our remaining pioneers, Lars, Dora, and Sydney, managed to make it to Oregon. So my conclusion on the real history behind it, I really enjoyed connecting it to the game, and the real history in general was very interesting. But as far as the game, I'm going to say amazing fun. I would enjoy just playing this anytime without the need for making a video and streaming it. So I would have to say it's the most enjoyable video that I've ever made, and I hope you enjoyed it also. Appreciate once again for 500 subscribers, and we may do something else fun soon to kind of celebrate that. But if for some reason I don't get to it, we'll at least do something big when we get to 1,000 subscribers for sure. I appreciate your attention, and good night.